Alvin Bragg sued Jim Jordan, and now Jim Jordan is responding, saying that the attempts to stop Congress from getting their subpoena, which they sent to a prior Manhattan DA, is invalid. Congress can get subpoenas if they want them, and Jim Jordan filed a response saying the same. Out of the Southern District of New York, you see it's Bragg versus Jordan. The original filing date was back in April. This was Alvin Bragg suing the Judiciary Committee. And they were saying that you cannot subpoena our person, Mark Pomerantz. This complaint was ultimately served on Jim Jordan. So this is Congress versus a state level prosecutor, just so we're clear about that, in federal court. And the state level prosecutor is suing Congress to stop this from happening. Congress wants to talk to people and investigate this, issued a subpoena. This was the filing, 35 pages, filed April 17th out of the Southern District of New York in a bizarre case, historical indeed. Alvin Bragg is prosecuting Donald Trump. Jim Jordan, just so we're clear, and the Judiciary Committee sent a subpoena in to go call Mark Pomerantz, a Manhattan DA who's no longer with the Manhattan DA's office, not a part of this active investigation or prosecution. Bragg is suing to stop that subpoena from coming into effect. This is Jordan's response. So this is Congress responding. This is the opposition of Jim Jordan and the Judiciary Committee to Alvin Bragg's motion for an injunction. We see all of the attorneys who are on this case. We fast forward through the table of contents and the table of authorities, and let's see how this filing begins. With an introduction. The Judiciary Committee and their attorney, they write, Alvin Bragg seeks extraordinary and unconstitutional relief from a court to impede our congressional inquiry. We have issued a subpoena and they must comply. They say that Alvin Bragg has sued Jim Jordan and the House Committee, but has failed to apprise the court that they're immune from a lawsuit under the speech and debate clause. He didn't tell the court that. And two, he demands, Alvin Bragg, emergency relief to stop a former employee, somebody who's not even at the office anymore, from cooperating with a congressional investigation, even though the individual has authored a public account in a book that this person wrote. Courts have consistently rejected attempts to enjoin compliance with congressional subpoenas. And here, Alvin does not cite a single case where a court has made the opposite ruling. This court should reject Alvin Bragg. They say that the DA's office out of New York began investigating Trump and has been doing this for years. In February, there was a guy called Mark Pomerantz, who we've talked a lot about here, the guy on 60 Minutes, who was very angry with Alvin. As soon as Alvin won, he decided not to prosecute. Mark Pomerantz said, "You're not coming to my cocktail parties on Sundays now." And Alvin said, "Holy moly, he got really good food there. Let me think about it." And then suddenly here we are. He was hired as a special assistant to Cyrus Vance. Mark Pomerantz is the person who has the subpoena coming his way. In 2021, to replace Vance, Alvin Bragg made the former President Trump an issue. Congress says, for example, Bragg was asked in a media interview, says, "I know a lot of people are wondering who has this job. Are they going to convict Donald Trump?" Somebody asked him that question. And we have this in a written declaration from Todd Tattleman. So we have a person who is declaring this. I asked this question. Whoever's in this role, Alvin, are they going to convict Trump? Alvin responded, "Look, that is the number one issue we know Vance is investigating. I'm the candidate in the race who has the experience with Donald Trump." He said, "As a candidate, it is a fact that I have sued the former president more than 100 times. The campaign of Alvin Bragg's rival for the nomination even accused him of attacking the president for every political advantage that he could get." So this was part, sort of a tacit thing that he was incorporating into his campaign. He wasn't actively saying, "I'm going to get in there and prosecute him," but he's saying, "I'm the candidate. Look, I'm the candidate who can do that." Bragg became district attorney January 1, 2022. Pomerantz resigned less than 3 months later. His publicly available resignation letter, which we read here, said he did so because Alvin wouldn't prosecute Trump, and he was uninvited to the parties. His public resignation reportedly left Bragg, quote, "deeply stung." His feelings were hurt and caused him to issue an unusual public statement emphasizing the investigation was far from over, right? We went through this. We've covered the whole thing here. Pomerantz, this attorney who is a former prosecutor who is now under congressional subpoena, wrote a book that gave a firsthand public account of the office's inner workings. In his words, he told the public, quote, all about the working of the investigation with the former president. He described the inner dialogue of the investigation. He recounted internal conversations between attorneys working on the investigation, summarized internal discussions with witnesses. He talked about attorney mental impressions, strengths and weaknesses of prosecutorial theories. On the other hand, he did not discuss what happened in front of the grand jury or in sealed litigation. Now, Bragg apparently took no legal action to prevent Pomerantz from disclosing any of the information in the book. He never sued to stop the book being published. It was released in February of this year. Pomerantz then gave a flurry of media interviews, showed up on 60 Minutes, Rachel Maddow all over. We've played clips here crying about this. I can't believe, yeah. Oh gosh. And remember, this is a weird situation because this guy apparently was working for free and resigned only to was dedicating his time as a senior attorney, just like a year plus. And then my understanding is he's now formed a law firm that is dedicated to prosecuting Donald Trump or whatever their neat phraseology is for that activity. Here, Bragg took no legal action to stop these interviews, to prevent Pomerantz from discussing any of the information. All the office did was send a single letter to Pomerantz saying that you got to get permission before you make these disclosures. Pomerantz responded that he's complied with his ethical obligations. However, meanwhile, in November 2022, right after Donald Trump declared his candidacy, it was publicly reported that the office was, quote, jump-starting a criminal investigation into Trump. On March 9th, it was reported that Bragg's office has invited the former president to testify before a grand jury, a move that comes before being indicted. It was reported that the office would seek to pursue, quote, unusual charges against the former president by bootstrapping an unnamed and uncharged, we still don't know what it is, federal crime onto a misdemeanor conduct, thus extending the statute of limitations. And given Bragg's campaign rhetoric, the timing of the resurrection of this campaign, Vance's prior decision not to proceed with the charges, the unusual nature of the charges, this gave widespread rise to speculation that something would be coming, and it did. The committee in Congress began this investigation soon thereafter, concluding that the prospect of a politically motivated prosecution of a former president could give rise to issues of substantial federal concern. You're kidding. That is because a former president is unlike any other former federal official, and Congress has long recognized the interest in the American people in the president does not cease when his term in office ends. Former presidents are entitled to protective services, special benefits, and the prospect of politically motivated prosecutions of presidents could have a profound impact on how they exercise their powers while in office. If presidents think that they have to exit the presidential office and be subject to prosecution by a bunch of hack partisans like Alvin Bragg or Letitia James, it might cause them to govern differently. And Congress might want to insulate them from that type of recourse so they can do their job without some elected person changing the course of the entire election. For example, the president could choose to avoid taking action he believes to be in the national interest because it might impact New York City, right? What if Donald Trump says, look, we got to make this decision. New York, sorry, you're going to bear the brunt of this thing, whatever it is. Or any other place. Hey, there's an emergency here. We're not going to be able to do this. We've got to do this instead of that. Pick any decision. It doesn't even have to be an emergency. Going to pick this decision, do this thing, or do this thing here. And now they just get prosecuted for violating some local ordinance. Trump shows up to lunch. One of his Secret Service agents parks in a parking space, forgets to refill the meter. Class 5 felony. Arrest him. Indict Donald Trump. How could he employed him, thereby he has agency over that. It's his fault. And it's reckless. He's obstructing the thoroughfare, which is interfering with our democracy. You pick whatever you want. It's nuts, which is why we give them some leniency or we give them some special classifications and don't do this stuff. On March 20th, 3 House committee chairmen sent Bragg a letter asking him to provide, amongst other things, office's receipts and use of federal funds. Unfortunately, Bragg has been uncooperative with this committee. It has been reported that when a committee staff member called the office and identified himself, they hung up on Congress. The staffer called back, and the person on the other end of the phone in New York, this is what they told Congress. If somebody said this to the January 6th Select Committee, they'd be in solitary confinement or dead already. FBI Christopher Wray would have an aneurysm over this, but says, this is what Alvin Bragg's office told Congress. They said, your committee has no jurisdiction over us. You're wrong. Stop calling us with this BS. They told Congress that. So Congress called back. They hung up again. In responding to the March 20th letter, the office refused to respond, but it did describe how it uses federal funds. So the committee sent a second letter over to Bragg's office that explained its investigation in more detail and said, we're asking for your voluntary compliance, buddy. Days later, the fact that the former president had been indicted was made public. The next day, the office responded to the committee's letter again, refused to voluntarily comply. They did tell us, though, they spent federal funds in its investigation of Trump. Federal money in the investigation. That's it. That's it. It's game over. That's all you need, right? Because Congress has the power of the purse. We know we have the Commerce Clause. We know they have just like endless gobs of authority when it comes to money. And so they just have questions about money and federal funds. That's it. As part of its investigation, the committee also sent a letter to Mark Pomerantz, who's no longer with the DA's office. Though the committee requested his voluntarily cooperation, he declined because the office, Bragg, had instructed him don't provide any information or any materials. And the committee, therefore, subsequently subpoenaed him to compel him to come. We read through all of that here. The committee informed Pomerantz that because of his unique role as a special assistant district attorney leading the investigation into Trump's finances, he's uniquely situated to provide relevant and necessary information to inform the committee's oversight and potential legislative reforms, which is basically copied and pasted from Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger's letters that they sent out to thousands of people all across the country after January 6th. They said, well, we're talking about the transition of power and we're talking about legislative reforms. And they came up with any reason and they were able to do whatever they want. Congress can do the same thing now. And they're doing it. Good to see. 5 days later, Bragg sued Chairman Jordan for sending a subpoena, the committee, and Pomerantz, and requested a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction, barring compliance of the subpoena. So Congress sends a subpoena to Mark Pomerantz, who's not even there anymore, and Bragg files a lawsuit against both of them, basically saying to Mark Pomerantz, you're not allowed to talk. I want an order from the court saying you can't speak at all. And also telling Congress their subpoena's invalid. Now, this is going through the Southern District of New York. So the court declined to enter this and ordered them to respond. And we have a hearing scheduled for April 19th. So we have some brief argument, which we'll just fast forward through because a lot of it's pretty technical. But they tell us, there are reasons why they're going to fail. Pomerantz the Pomerantz subpoena is protected by Supreme Court law. There's many instances where they've sent this before. They say that plaintiff Alvin Bragg implicates federal legislative issues, spending federal money. This alone is an issue where legislation could be had. Congress has the ability to propose legislation. Pomerantz is a very relevant witness. He knows the inner workings of the office. And to be a valid legislative inquiry, there doesn't need to be a predictable end result. Just whatever they want to do, it's Congress. And generally, I don't like this, right? We kind of hate this when Congress comes into our states and into our cities and impedes on all of our crap. But this is what we were talking about happening. If they're going to do that, if the January 6th Select Committee is going to do this, they are swinging the first punch, and the Republicans have to play the same game in order to survive. They're doing it. It's a nice thing to see that they're doing it. It's unfortunate this is the current state of affair of our country, but this is how it is. And if they're going to be playing this way until they are defeated, the Republicans better be playing the same way. Congressional defendants are necessary parties under the rules, meaning they need him. Congress says we need him. We need him. There's precedent to tell us accordingly. And so as we fast forward, you see, we're going to scroll down to the very end of this thing and see what the conclusion has for us before we jump into what they're asking for. And here we are. They say, for these reasons, the motion for the temporary restraining order and the preliminary injunctions should be denied. This would be really watering down the congressional authority, and they're asking the court to take a hands-off approach. If this relief is granted, in other words, if Alvin Bragg is successful and Congress can't do this, It would improperly usurp the committee's constitutional power to do their job, to investigate and conduct oversight. No outside entity, whether a subpoena recipient like Pomerantz or his former employee, is permitted to challenge the wisdom of the congressional approach or the methodology. Congress reigns supreme. It's Congress. And this comes from a U.S. Supreme Court case called Eastland, right? And this is, I got to imagine, something that is going to be laughed out of there.